So today I am delighted to be joined by Katie Gleghorn, who is, what's your job title? Consultant.
Yeah, you can say diversity and inclusion specialist. My
Cool.
actual job title is portfolio director, but it loses the essence of what this conversation is about.
Yeah.
So with diversity and inclusion consultant is fine.
Okay, cool. So today I am delighted to be joined by Katie Gleghorn, who is a diversity and inclusion specialist at Charlotte Sweeney Associates. Katie, thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Morning, thanks for having me. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, and in your brand spanking new office as well. What a lovely
That's
backdrop.
it. 48 hours into the new house. So yes, the boxes are all out of view and the office is set up and raring to go.
Well, I was going to say, thanks for making time to speak to me. You must be surrounded by a sea of boxes.
Yes, there are a few, but the project manager in me has meant that many of them are unpacked and organised already.
Oh,
So we're
fair
good.
enough. Fabulous. So I have wanted to get you on this podcast for ages, well before all this coronavirus stuff kicked off. But actually, I think that the things I wanted to talk to you about are or could be as relevant for the situation that we're in, just as much as they were previously. So I guess I'm interested to know, from a D&I perspective, what opportunities do you see in the current times?
So, from a diversity and inclusion perspective, the current situation is absolutely fascinating. So, we're seeing lots of organisations responding to a crisis and seeing just the difference in how those organisations are coping. There's a couple of opportunities really. So, we've had lots of organisations who, people will be aware of, who have dragged their heels with regards to working from home, around flexible working and what they offer their employees. So to be thrust into this situation where actually it was a non-negotiable for colleagues to work from home, that's been fascinating. And I think as time plays out, it'll be really interesting to see what learnings organisations of all sizes in all industries take from this experience. There was one in the press last week, if you think Twitter have gone on record and told all their staff that they'll keep their offices open, but it's entirely down to staff now to decide how and when they return, which is brilliant. I think there's twofold from the working from home perspective, from a diversity and inclusion angle as well, is around, and it comes a little bit into a challenge rather than opportunity. The converse of it is that working from home isn't great for everybody. Be that, physical restrictions around actual space, but there's also, another challenge. I'm delving into challenges here, but I think that's okay. The challenge around presenteeism and how that's going to evolve. So the mindset shift for employees and organisations to think about what they expect from employees, their availability. Is it that there's a suite of leaders who suddenly have an expectation that because we're on lockdown, they know you're going to be there all the time? So what does that do for flexible working and leadership?
Do you think it'll force a change in the conversation?
Yeah, I think it'll absolutely force a change. And I think that moving forward, what will be really interesting to see is how many organisations are desperate to get back to the old norm without applying any learnings and evolving. So, how many organisations just want to get back to normal, get people back in the office without pausing and reflecting and seeing what innovations have transpired, new ways of working, what it's done to their productivity in terms of work-life balance from their employees. So I think it'll be really interesting. I think the Twitter one, are really kind of setting the trailblazers for thinking differently on that front. I suspect there may be some organisations who go too far the other way too and say, actually, you've all worked from home, now we'll just do away with offices. And to my earlier point, that's not, in my opinion, that's not necessarily going to fix any problems, because there may be a whole suite of employees who still want that workplace and that office. So yeah, definitely, you know, from a personal experience, tipping into that really curious space of what's the future going to look like now.
It's going to be so interesting, isn't it? I mean, from a coaching perspective, a lot of the conversations I'm having at the moment are people saying, I'm not going back. I've proven I can work from home. I enjoy the balance I'm having. I've got all this time suddenly to learn new skills.
Yeah.
I'm going to be having some harsh conversations with my boss and saying things have got to change, and I'm not sure organisations are prepared for that conversation.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I think it's around, and you know, this brings in the whole diversity and inclusion agenda, because those instances are going to be really specific, because you're going to have a whole raft of people who to that point want to do things differently. But then businesses need to also support people, because, you know, if this way of working is going to be sustained for a little bit longer, there's a real impact, you know, in terms of how you bring people together, the diversity of your teams, and how people cope in this situation. So, you know, it can be particularly isolating for a lot of people to be at, you know, if you live on your own, you're working on your own, you know, there's going to be a whole raft of scenarios that leaders are going to need to work through and support their employees with, that really does, you know, articulate the point of, when you've got diverse and inclusive organisations, to make sure you are truly inclusive and you cater for all those needs as best you can.
Yeah. Is there a question or a couple of questions that you could recommend to leaders or business owners they can be asking themselves now to prepare for if, when, how we come back to the workplace?
So I think a couple of questions, definitely be asking how the experience is for individuals, and make no assumptions, and it's
So check in
creating
with the people.
Yeah, check in with people. And I think, you know, it's really calling out the need to create an environment virtually where you've got psychological safety, where people feel comfortable in having those conversations with, you know, their line manager or their leaders about what the reality of their situation is. You know, are you struggling with, you know, the day-to-day work? Is your productivity, you know, increasing or decreasing because of your current setup? What support could an organisation give you to make sure that you are the best employee when you're at work? And where do those boundaries lie, and what's reasonable? And the other thing is, for leaders in particular, there's a lot of leaders who've never led teams in this way either. So it's around being open and transparent, that as a leader, you're going through that period of change too. And how can you bring together all the various components of your diverse teams to make that work for the business?
It's a lot to think about, isn't it?
Yes.
It's, yeah. I'm so sick, and I'm sure you are sick of the word unprecedented, but it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, like I said, that sparking that curiosity, you know, we've had to suddenly put in practice a resilience that in our lifetime we never, you know, anticipated a scenario like this would occur. And, you know, what's the future hold? Is this going to become the new norm? Are we going to frequently go through periods like this? And how adaptable and flexible will organisations have to be?
Have you can you think of a great example of an organisation that's keeping culture strong in this remote working scenario? Have you come across anything?
Yeah, I think there's lots of really good organisations out there, and I don't think this is necessarily just you know, it doesn't rely on the flexibility of being a small organisation, or actually being a big organisation necessarily having the, you know, the funding to support. This is really about how much leaders understand their teams and the needs of the business, and how they can link the two to make sure that there's a really nice balance of those two factors to enable the business work to continue,
Mm-hmm.
but protecting your staff and being really respectful of, this isn't what anybody signed up to going into either this role or going into this year. And it's okay to find your way through that together.
I think that's definitely the best advice I've seen, is just to not worry too much about the future, but just work out the next right step.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to feel your way through it as well.
Yeah.
We haven't got all the answers. Let's
Yeah.
just be kind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking about that, and just making sure that, like you said, there's no rule book. We haven't done this before, so we don't have the answers, and there are great learnings that we can already put in place 3 months down the line, but we continue to kind of find our way through it together.
So, Katie, I would love to hear about your story, about how you got to be where you are today, if you wouldn't mind delving into that.
Not at all. So my background is predominantly financial services. I'd spent 16 years working for a large financial organisation, done a number of roles within the organisation, kind of project management, business analysis, and then more recently I was heavily involved in the diversity and inclusion agenda for that organisation. Absolutely loved that work. There was a real tipping point where work suddenly didn't feel like work. I felt like I'd really found what made me tick. It was a great build on the skills that I naturally excelled in, that I particularly enjoyed. And then I was presented after 16 years with a fantastic opportunity to take redundancy. So last summer, I snapped their hand off, took redundancy very willingly, and decided that actually my aspiration was to turn diversity and inclusion into the day role. Charlotte Sweeney was somebody that I had worked with previously. We'd worked together on a couple of events, and great for me that Charlotte was looking to expand her team. So I've been working with Charlotte for just under a year now. It's been brilliant. I absolutely love it, and thoroughly enjoying the full-time role of diversity and inclusion.
So there's so much there I want to dive into. I'm not really sure where to start, but take me back to that moment where you said that you'd found work that doesn't feel like work. What did that feel like for you?
So that's just this overwhelming sense that you get out of bed with a spring in your step. And I feel every day, it's very much my authentic self. Is I'm incredibly grateful for the role that I do. There's an awful lot of people out there that go and do jobs that they don't necessarily enjoy, because they have to, because that's their circumstances. So I feel particularly privileged that actually I'm in a position where I can do a job that I absolutely love. I get to meet so many new people going through all different set of circumstances, walks of life, experiences. That helps me grow as an individual. I'm like a sponge around people. I love to hear what their journey's been like and what their experience is. So to be able to do that and do that as a job, and essentially the work that we do is around influencing mindsets, and it genuinely feels nice to think that the work that you undertake makes a difference to people. So it's never ever a chore, and I feel really lucky and grateful that I get to undertake this work.
So what time period was it between understanding that your life's purpose was in D&I and grabbing onto redundancy with two hands?
I think I'd spent about 12 months gradually taking on more and more responsibility at my old employers with regards to diversity and inclusion, and kind of educating myself on the industry and learning more and more. we were aware that redundancy was going to be an option. So from I had enough time to make myself comfortable with what was coming. So like I said, respectful that everybody's got a different experience, but for me, redundancy was a very positive experience. It was a great opportunity, and it allowed me to take my career in the direction that I wanted to take it in.
Absolutely.
And I also would be a huge advocate, and if I speak to people who are maybe a little bit further back on their career journey, to really embrace taking on a range of roles. My personal experience was that in my early career, I felt very constrained by lots of leaders around me telling me I had to pick a discipline and stick to it. Actually, that just never worked for me. So all the roles that I'd had up to press have led me to being able to do this job and enjoy it and do it well, because I've got a really broad skill set, and I love that. That's very much aligned to my personality, is, you know, a thirst for knowledge and liking to know lots of things about lots of different things. So yeah, it was just a perfect combination, really.
So I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but it's around that time that you were taking redundancy that you and I really started to get to know each other.
We did.
And I remember we went for a coffee. I remember sitting there, and it was like you created this space for yourself. You didn't know what your next step was going to be, but you trusted that it was going to happen for you in one way or another. And it was such a privilege to watch you on that journey, just kind of step into your power and open yourself up to the perfect thing for you. And lo and behold, it came along, and you're here where you are today. I mean, that's obviously from an observer's perspective, but what's your take on that?
No, that's really, really lovely to hear you say that. Thank you for sharing. And from my perspective, it was the first time, not just the first time in my career, the first time in my life leaving that organisation where I felt a new confidence. And that was a confidence that I would recognise the right opportunity when it came, and to trust that it would come at the right time, and that I would be okay if it didn't, if I had to wait a little bit, that I'd be okay. And when Charlotte and I started talking about a potential role, Charlotte Sweeney Associates is a great brand to work for, a great consultancy. Charlotte has done some incredible work over her career, and she's a great boss and a great mentor. And for the first time, I just had this really nice feeling that I was ready for a challenge. I didn't expect it to be easy, and I knew it would be hard work, but it was hard work that had got me where I was, and that I was absolutely ready for it. So when it presented itself, just kind of, grabbed it with both hands and embraced it, and have not for a single second looked back.
That's such a lovely way of describing it. I think it'll be inspiring to a lot of people. Practically, do you have any tips for somebody in a similar situation? So what you did to put yourself in the way of Charlotte, essentially.
Can't underestimate the value of your network. So if I look back on my journey, 3 or 4 years prior to me leaving financial services, I'd undertaken an activity to just analyse my network. I'd been in one organisation for 16 years, so my internal network was really strong. But my external network probably needed some work. So I spent some time focusing on that. That's how I was introduced to Lean in Leeds. That's also the point at which I became a trustee at Touchstone, which is a mental health charity, and really focused the attention on my network, but building my network in a really authentic way, in a way that's true to me. And that network continues to grow. So that was a real turning point in my career development. The other thing that I think has been really important, and if I could step back in time and tell myself this, or indeed, share it with others. One of the most valuable skills I've developed is to channel that internal critic. So that
Tell me
voice,
more.
the little voice inside your head that absolutely everybody has, that can and often is, particularly in a professional sense, so critical. Just flip that and start small. And it may not necessarily purely be professional, tip it into your personal life as well, but start that internal critic and be really conscious of when that voice is saying something negative or holding you back, and start to flip the narrative on that. And you can start small, you can do it once or twice a day, but the feeling you get when you start to do that naturally is so empowering that it just makes such a difference. And you never turn that critic off completely. In times of stress or more challenging circumstances, that voice is there, but you learn to deal with it in a much better way. And that really, like I said, that I think I would like to think gave me that confidence without it tipping into arrogance as well, because that's not an attractive or a great trait for anybody to demonstrate. But that confidence that you can do it, and that you're really prepared to take the learnings. If something goes wrong, that's okay too, because it's great learning and great experience.
Well, as a coach, I have to say that there are no failures, there are only learning experiences.
Absolutely.
I love that idea of flipping it. Can you give us an example? It doesn't have to be too personal if rather not, and I'd understand why you wouldn't want to share something so personal, but just an example of how you could flip that inner critic.
So I think when I was thinking about expanding my network, there were lots of opportunities for, particularly through the Lean in Leeds network, and also kind of the day roll with Charlotte. There's lots of opportunities to do presenting. So, that's to a room of, it could be anywhere from, half a dozen individuals, right up to a room full of 100, whole range of experiences. That internal critic could really hold people back from doing it. And I forced myself in the first few instances to really push through that uncomfortable feeling of, I'm at the front, all eyes are on me. I do get nervous. I do think about it a lot, sleepless night the night before. But once I step into it, this is an example of it right now. I really enjoy it, and I love the feeling that it gives me afterwards. So it's just that internal voice remembering that all those negative feelings, the nervousness, the apprehension, they're all perfectly natural. The validation that you care, and that's important. And remind yourself that you can do it, and that's the voice that you have to listen to, and that needs to practice and needs work to make sure it's a louder voice, that you can do it and you'll be great. And I would advocate that to anybody. There's it's talked around a lot, but you've got to talk to yourself in the way that you would talk to others.
It's by far one of the most common topics that I coach on, is the inner critic, the saboteur, the little devil on your shoulder, whatever you want to talk about it. It's that whole question of what could you do if you weren't afraid.
Absolutely.
I can't remember who said it, but there's a lovely quote about that nerves are just excitement without the breath. And I try to remember that one. If I'm going on to speak or doing anything scary, it's breathe and convert your nerves into excitement. I find that one's quite helpful.
Yeah. And just a top tip for public speaking is 99% of the time, the people in the audience want you to do well. They don't want you to stand up there and make an idiot of yourself. That's not really the intention. So remembering that and putting yourself in the shoes of, if you were in the audience and watching somebody else, that can be a great help too.
Thank you. So let's talk about your role at the moment. What do you actually do? What is D&I? Tell us all.
So as you mentioned right at the beginning, so I'm a diversity and inclusion specialist, and we're a diversity and inclusion consultancy. We work with a number of organisations globally, as well as in the UK. A whole range of industries, a whole range of types of organisations, size of organisations, and that can be at any touch point. So this could be an organisation who do absolutely nothing on diversity and inclusion. It could be an organisation who've got a really well-established diversity and inclusion agenda. So as a consultancy, we pride ourselves on offering completely bespoke solutions. So we have a number of highly qualified consultants who have all held senior diversity and inclusion roles in organisations. So team that experience together, and that allows us to offer the right solution for the right client, because this isn't a lift and shift. What works for one organisation might have a really detrimental impact in your organisation. So anything from developing a diversity and inclusion strategy, to coaching, to doing some gender research pieces, to looking at employee resource groups, any aspect of diversity and inclusion, then as a consultancy we can support with that.
Why would a leader or an entrepreneur who's looking to scale a company, why would they care about diversity and inclusion as an issue?
So it's really interesting, and this is a conversation that we have with every client that we talk with, and this is around the business case for diversity and inclusion. There is tons of research out there that proves time on time the benefits of having diverse and inclusive organisations. Things like increasing your bottom line, more diverse teams will lead to better innovations, so you can better understand your target market, your consumer group.
So the real commercial implications for getting it right.
Yeah. The evidence is there from the likes of, McKinsey, Deloitte, Boston Consulting Group. Everything's out there to demonstrate the real impact to a business case that would validate why you need diversity and inclusion on your agenda. And I think that would be my key takeaway to any organisation and any leader, is to really understand that that's the case, and to use diversity and inclusion as a key business enabler. So all the other objectives that you've got, you will be able to underpin those and achieve them if you have diverse and inclusive workforces. So yeah, and I just think for any organisation, it's absolutely vital. From a staff and colleague engagement perspective, you've got more engaged and happier colleagues when you're working with more diverse teams, and also just how to tap into talent pipelines, how to attract talent. That stems from having catering for diverse and inclusive panels and applications. So yes, there's tons of evidence out there, and I think the other thing that's changed in the last few years is that it can really make you an employer of choice. So people's expectations and what they want from an organisation in terms of this agenda, people are no longer afraid to go out and actively seek, okay, so what does this potential company do on this, or what's your standpoint on this, and how will I fit in, and where will I see myself in that organisation?
I think that's really important, because the whole point of this podcast is to educate and inspire audacious leaders who are willing to take brave risks, but who want to grow authentic and values-led companies. They don't want to grow companies that are all about the bottom line. It's about making a difference, essentially. So it sounds like you're saying, for a myriad of reasons, that the D&I agenda needs to be up there pretty highly.
Yeah, and I think some kind of top tips on that front would be definitely understand your starting position, because with any aspect of business, to do it and do it properly, you really need to understand the problem that you're trying to fix. So really take stock of where you are on your journey right now, even if that's your day one or you're quite far down the line. Then I think there's something about defining your aspirations, and don't be afraid to stretch yourself on that. We talk to organisations, and there's business areas, and it's natural, it's understandable, and it's the way of business where there's pushback and challenge against this agenda. But the organisations that do this and do this well do not just bolt diversity and inclusion on at the end of everything. It, like I said before, it underpins everything that they do. If you were set some sales targets, for example, you wouldn't have to provide the evidence that you could absolutely achieve that. It would be, this is our goal, this is our aspiration, and we're going to do what we can to achieve it. That's exactly the same with diversity and inclusion.
So make sure they're smart, basically.
Absolutely. But don't be afraid to stretch yourself either. And I think the other thing that you can do in this space is you can really set yourselves up to be trailblazers on this front, because you can be, have a think about where your aspirations lie. Do you want to be the best in your peer group on this agenda, or do you want to just be the best in a particular area? There's lots of focus and lots of attention around the gender aspect, and that's understandable, and that's all great work. We're seeing more and more conversations start to open up around ethnicity and race and passport. So I think for any organisation is start somewhere, pick a couple of goals and targets, and progress from there. But the absolute key and my biggest top tip would just be to make a start.
Thank you. And is there a common mistake you see that you just want to pick a business owner up or a leader up and shake them by the scruff of the neck and say, don't do that? It drives absolutely nuts. I
think there's two things really. The notion that you can lift and shift. So conversations around, can you just tell us what's worked elsewhere and we'll just do the same? Like I said, there's nothing, it's not going to be exactly the same culture in your organisation. It's not going to have the same leadership. There's so many variables that what is bound to work with one organisation isn't necessarily going to fit with your organisation. So that, again, as I mentioned earlier, is around, where we as a consultancy ensure that we offer bespoke solutions, because we've enough experience to know what's worked across a range of organisations to be able to help you create the solution for you. And I think the other thing that I would just say is around making sure that diversity and inclusion is everybody's responsibility. So yes, you may have somebody in a diversity and inclusion role in your organisation, you may not, but actually creating accountability, particularly at a senior leadership level, is vital. And I'd encourage organisations to focus attention in that area initially. But yeah, it's everybody's responsibility. It doesn't just sit with an individual. Until you get everybody to take accountability for that responsibility, then it makes it even more challenging.
Absolutely. I mean, what advice would you have for entrepreneurs who are just starting out on their journey? Should this be part of the company vision from the very start?
Absolutely, without a doubt. Particularly if you're starting out, because you want to give yourselves the biggest and best chance of setting yourself up for success. So that may come from having really diverse teams. There's a wonderful quote that we use an awful lot day to day is around diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance, and that's so vital. And there's lots of organisations that don't necessarily strike the right balance between diversity and inclusion. You need a balance of both. But if you're just starting your business out, attracting talent from a range of backgrounds with a range of experiences could really give your business the best opportunity to start on the right foot. And yeah, just have it as a non-negotiable consideration from the outset.
That's really interesting. I mean, you and I have discussed before about wording in job adverts. So there's a large piece a few years ago about how men were more attracted to technical language. So a lot of companies were deliberately changing the wording in their job adverts to softer skills to try and attract more women. I guess I'm just interested to know your thoughts on how companies can tweak their talent pipeline or their adverts or their brand placement to to attract, to get in front of as diverse an audience as possible.
So I think you need to ensure that you have support from individuals, either internally or externally, where diversity and inclusion is their specialism, to help you understand where your unconscious bias may lie, where you have processes and procedures that actually may be making decisions that alienate or create a dropout for a particular group of people.
Yes.
And I think it's again a really objective assessment of your current state of play and getting that objective view, because many of the kind of the pitfalls and those opportunities are lost to create diverse teams are done unconsciously. So being able to understand each of the different touch points where decisions are made, you could have really good, for example, recruitment, you could have really balanced, you could have a great advert, you could have really balanced application routes, but then if your panel isn't particularly diverse, then what has the potential to happen is actually those that are successful through interview are all the same, and you end up with the group thing. So you've done lots of little steps to get yourself to a point, but then essentially you fall at the last hurdle.
Yes.
And there is so much talent out there. So, businesses are really missing a trick if they don't position themselves to attract and retain that talent as well.
That's so interesting. I mean, given your journey and where you are today, what advice would you give yourself from 10 years ago?
I think just to always be me and never make apologies for being my authentic self.
Yes.
I've kind of got 3 rules that I live by, and that's be authentic, be curious, and be kind.
Amazing.
And I think that, living by those three rules and making no apologies for sticking to those things would have been really valuable if those 3 things had dawned on me a long time ago. But I'm in a good place, and everything's a journey, and everything that's happened up to press, the good, the bad, everything in between, the ugly, has kind of got me to be this person today. So yeah, it's all good. And I just think there's anybody can be anything they want to be or do anything they want to achieve, and don't be afraid to ask for support. I'm very much in favour of the way that the business world is evolving, where people support each other and help each other out. It's less competitive. I'm not a competitive person I'm not naturally a competitive person, which most people say you must be, but I'm really not. So yeah, working together and bringing people together for the greater good is definitely always gonna win.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And then final question, I promise. What's a podcast or a book that you couldn't live without?
Well, I have a couple prepared already. So 2 favourite books that I would recommend anybody to read. Creativity Inc. Don't know if you've heard of this one, but this was by
Heard of it, haven't read it.
Ed Catmull. So this was the guy behind Disney and Pixar. So if you liked Shoe Dog, the Nike story, then I actually think that this one is a better version. Lots of focus on leadership, behaviours, and culture. A lot about workplace culture in there, but it's a really
interesting.
Nice read.
And for the podcast as well, I'm absolutely delighted to say that Katie's brought along props to show us.
And the other book that I've got is Sin New World by Ruby Wax. So I've read that really recently, and was a fantastic read. Was brilliant from my perspective, having previously suffered with stress and anxiety, and at some point depression as well. And this book prompted me to go on and finally book myself onto a leadership and mindfulness course that I'm
fantastic
about to conclude. I'm about this week 5 of week 6, which I'm loving, and it was Ruby's book that really kind of cemented my desire to go and do that. So
fantastic.
that. And I'm sure we can talk about that another time. And from a podcast perspective, I thoroughly enjoy Fern Cotton's Happy Place. I love the range of guests on there, the range of topics. From my personal perspective, it really taps into aligning with my history in terms of my mental health. But from a diversity and inclusion point of view, there's such a range of guests on there that it really feeds that curiosity. And I think Fern does it in a really, really authentic and beautiful way that make it really engaging and really easy listening. And I find myself, if I've ever got a long car journey to do, then that's my go-to podcast, because it just makes that journey a pleasure.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Katie. Well, while I've got you, I'm going to ask that I can come back and we can do this again in 6 months or so, see where we are as a world.
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to.
But thank you, as always. You're inspiring, thought-provoking, warm and funny, and I hopefully you'll have inspired a lot of people with your story today. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been lovely to talk to you, as it always is. And for anybody that does listen to the podcast, then I'm really open. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd really love to hear what your thoughts are and any experiences that you've got to share. Then I'd love to hear those.
Perfect. Thanks, Katie. See you soon.
Take care. Bye.